Hello. So, review of the day is for a short story. It's occurred to me that I can actually review just a short story. I don't have to review a whole book, much as Goodreads would suggest that I do. So, I've been in more than a bit of a reading slump recently. I'm sure all of us avid readers have them. We'll finish a book, either it was so good that we just can't follow it up, or it was, in my case, so bad that I was left frustrated and uneasy and unwilling to mentally settle on my next book. Now, just as I'm sure that we all have our reading slumps, I'm sure we all have our own techniques of getting through them. And I've tried a few of mine, and it's like change genre completely, but I didn't have the mental quietude that I need to read a non-fiction book, which was the obvious science fiction to non-fiction. And I couldn't really settle to any fantasy. I tried the tactic of rereading an old favourite which has a known emotion that will draw me in. It's one of the ones right at the top shelf, you can't quite see them, but that didn't really work either. So I thought I'd change my mental attitude and read a short story. Not a book of short stories, but just one short story from this rather beautiful Penguin edition that I've had for a while. And I think that this works well. I think having one short story is the right length, and it's J.G. Ballard, so it's a beautifully written short story. And this book, which I personally enjoy a great deal. So let's start with the book, because it's a Penguin science fiction. It's got this amazing artwork on the cover. It's from 66, I think, 1966. It's called The Four-Dimensional Nightmare. As you saw from the cover, it's got I think 8 stories in total in it, and I read the first one. That's The Voices of Time. It's got acknowledgements as well. 1963 it looks like, 1963 Penguin science fiction. And so the artwork looks all futuristic and kind of cyberpunk and kind of net oriented, but if you zoom right in, you'll see those labels are ATP. So we're looking at cellular changes, and that's very, very consistent with The Voices of Time, which is about genetics in a way. And I also love that the wraparound, the back of the book is actually so beautiful. I kept picking it up and thinking that was the cover, but it's not. And on there, right at the bottom, where you probably can't see it, it says cover painting by Giorgio Gordoni. Great cover painting, Gordoni. Really well done. And for copyright reasons, apparently, this edition is not available in the USA. But that's fine. I've got my edition. So, J.G. Ballard, I did a bit of a search on him, and he is apparently strongly linked with New Wave science fiction, but specifically English New Wave science fiction. And the short story that I read, The Voices of Time, is consistent with the last book of his I read, The Drowned World. I'm disconcerted by the fact that I'm pretty sure I read The Drowned World this year, but I can't find my edition. I either borrowed it or I got rid of it. I don't think I got rid of it. I certainly don't want to have. I seem to remember a really beautiful little mass market copy that I had at one stage. I hope I didn't get rid of it. So like The Drowned World, what you've got here is you've got this non-directional almost story that is full of symbolism and full of exploration, mostly inner exploration. It's beautiful to read. There's an inclusion of biology, genetics, and evolution. Now, some of the information, as always, that Ballard has included is inconsistent with biology and evolution and genetics as we know it today. But if you know that and you just read around it, that's just no problem at all. Because, again, the writing is just stunning. It is largely thought of as a dystopian science fiction. Hold that thought. Sorry. Dystopian science fiction. It was first published in October 1960, Wikipedia tells me. And later in a short story collection, which isn't this one. So it's calling it an early example of the inner space type of story which drove the New Wave movement in the 60s. And yes, it certainly is. Other reviews that I've read about this story specifically say that it has little or no obvious plot. I know better. It has a plot. Philip Chase and the Critical Dragon have told me that. But it doesn't have a directional one. So what you've got neurosurgeon Powers, and he's living in a world that is very lightly painted. This is about the world building very strongly, but the world building isn't thrown at you. You get the sense of impending doom. So Ballard is known for writing in dystopian and dystopian style. This feels like a bit of a last man standing, end of the world scenario. We are aware that the world is being bathed with radiation, and we're made aware of this when Powers finds a strange turtle that's evolved a shell in which it's incorporated lead from its environment to protect it from the radiation. He takes it back to a bit of a zoo full of terrariums where plants and animals are evolving weird and wonderful responses to radiation and strange things. The anemone that he has in one of the tanks particularly enchanted me. So you've got that, but at the same time we're aware that there's this wide-scale infection of a narcolepsy happening all around the planet where people just fall asleep and are cared for in large institutions, which reminded me of a Neil Gaiman comic in which when dream is captured, people fall asleep and don't wake up. Knowing Gaiman, I wouldn't be surprised if the Ballard story helped inspire that. Anyway, so you've got Powers, and he's going through the motions, but he's only just going through the motions. It turns out that he too has that narcolepsy, and he's sleeping more and more hours in every day. At one stage, he has an appointment with another. Please don't do that, Ruby Cheek. Please don't. No, there we go. My little dinosaur who eats books. At one stage, he has an appointment with another psychologist called Anderson, and Anderson tells him that the human race in general have been sleeping more and more as time gets on. And later we have an exposition-y type moment where Ballard is talking to a young woman and explains that there's two genes, and that if you inherit the two of them together, then that means that you are essentially going to fall into this narcoleptic sleep. As well as the radiation and the narcolepsy, there's a whole heap of other strange things happening. The reader gets this strong sense of dystopia occurring, and the feeling that the end is not only in sight, but we're travelling rapidly down the world towards it. This is enhanced by a few different things, including a character who's receiving these transmissions from out of space of reducing numbers. And one theory is that when this huge list of numbers reduces down to zero, the end of the universe will just have occurred. And there's hints of contact with aliens and a Mercury travel to outer space. There's all these small hints that come at you. But essentially, this is an inner space dystopia. So you've got Powers recording his feelings and interviews with his therapist. You've got a journal in which he records strange things that are happening, and often without a lot of context. You have to build your context for this story in your own head, which was apparently exactly what I was in the mood for. And all of this is done in beautiful writing, because J.G. Ballard, beautiful writing. What else? There's also this strange sequence where another psychologist who he'd known previously, called Whitby, had been researching radiation and its effect on these two genes, which may or may not activate, which may or may not end up in narcolepsy. At one point, Powers is hypothesizing that the activation of these genes results in the narcolepsy, which is somehow meant to be a biological response to the increased radiation and ensure future survival. It's a pretty wild idea. I don't think that in any way, any stage of this is actually scientific, but written in the 60s when genetics was wholly new to everyone, it's a wonderful exploration of what it could mean, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. Right, so Whitby was the psychologist who committed suicide before the story begins, and Powers has inherited his little zoo with his radiation producing equipment and his strange sunflower that sounds like a carnivorous sunflower, the odd anemone that is also incorporating heavy metals into its structure and is trying to use its tentacles to climb out of the terrarium. All these wild evolutionary concepts. Whitby had been using these x-rays, but he had also been doing this strange thing in the hospital. In an abandoned swimming pool, he's been creating this strange mandala. And the abandoned swimming pool filling up with leaves, which Powers goes to try and expose the mandala. I can't really express how fascinating and luxurious the reading experience of all this is, because Ballard takes small things and he weaves them into this pattern that is very mentally satisfying. As Powers sleeps more and more every day, he starts forgetting things, and we realise that he is, in his own way, in a different spot, trying to replicate the same mandala that Whitby did. Anyone who enjoys writing and speculative and new wavy type stuff, especially English new wavy type stuff, is bound to enjoy the story. People who won't enjoy this story, I suspect, are those who want clear-cut answers. Ballard doesn't really do clear-cut answers in anything of his that I've read, but he especially doesn't do clear-cut answers in The Voices of Time. In this short story, he doesn't even give you the questions to which the clear-cut answers might come. It's basically a drifting through this dystopian landscape, this inner mental construct of this psychologist who we know is either going to end soon, whether he finally falls asleep for 24 hours a day or something else happens. It's an end to him and it's an end to the world. You've got all these weird and wonderful concepts, each of which could actually be a whole novel in their own right. Like, one character lives in a house that has been built based on a mathematical equation for... I'm not a mathematician. It's meant to represent the square root of -1, apparently. And the person who's living there rented it cheaply because most people who go in there are instantly lost and can't get a handle on it. This person can. Anyway, you've got lots of concepts like that. You've got the house based on the square root of -1, sorry. You've got the radiation that activates these genes that may or may not be real. I don't think they are. You've got a whole heap of personal experience that's told in a sleepy, almost sleepy narrative. It's a great story. Has it shaken me out of my reading slump? I'm not sure. It did kind of make me want to read more Ballard, but since I'm in a reading slump due to reading 2 novels by the same author too close together, I'm not going to give in to that. I think I'm going to try and slide sideways, maybe into a fantasy or maybe into a non-fiction. Anyway, because I'm not reading as much as normal, which hurts the omnivorous reader in me significantly, a day without a lot of reading in it is a day in which there's hours where I just don't know what to do with. Not used to it. So I'm curious. I'm spending more time on YouTube than usual. Tell me if you have reading slumps. Tell me what makes that reading slump happen. Tell me how you get out of it, because I'm curious to compare notes. I think the short story may have kicked it, but I'm not confident, and I won't know until I try to get into another book and succeed or fail. Also, tell me if you've read any Ballard and what Ballard I should hunt for next, because I do think I need more J.G. Ballard in my life. Anyway, have a great day, read good books, and remember that any book that you enjoy and nurtures your reading identity, that is a good book. Bye.